for watching.
As part of the new segment to the show called the Compass Literature Corner, we are talking to local authors who have had an impact on this region, or whom this region has had an impact on. However, today we are out of the studio and in Marshall, Minnesota, where we are talking to the keynote speaker of the Southwest Initiative Foundation's Grow Your Own Summit. This author has less of an impact on the region and more of an insight into an issue in our region. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say that today's guest is the political scientist Robert Putnam. Robert, welcome.
Thanks very much.
So tell us a little bit about what inspired your eye-opening book, Our Kids, The American Dream in Crisis.
It was inspired in part by learning more about the current situation in my hometown. I grew up in a little town, small town in Ohio. Kids from all social classes mingled and so on. And then my research team and I went back there a few years ago to kind of see what the situation was like now. And frankly, a disaster had hit. The town, this little town, was much more divided in economic terms. There was one set of homes along Lake Erie there that are $1 million mansions, but then just on the other side of the road were the dilapidated double wides and the shacks, and the kids on those two sides of that one road, it's called East Harbor Road, I'm talking about a real road. The kids on that side, the sky's the limit. The kids on this side, they have no future.
No opportunity.
And no opportunity. And that was not true. We know, because I've gone back and talked to all my classmates of the high school class of 1959. It wasn't true then, it is true now. And what that reflects, and this is the more general point, is a growing gap between rich kids and poor kids in Port Clinton and across the country.
Now, when you define the opportunity gap, you define the impact it has on the economic future of America. So what are the most crucial social economic settings that are maybe most influential to this gap?
Well, the gap has grown for a number of big reasons. If you go up to the 30,000 foot level and say what's happened that's caused this, partly it's the growing income gap between rich families, or between affluent families and impoverished families, and therefore parents on the right side of the tracks are able to afford more things, and they are spending more money on their kids, and they're spending more time with their kids. A second big difference is actually probably more important but is less well known, which is that American society has become more segregated in social class terms. We're not more segregated in religious or racial terms. We're now all jumbled up in religious and racial terms. But in social class terms, increasingly, we're either living in rich enclaves or in poor enclaves.
There's not as much exposure to the poverty, so there's not as much empathy.
That's exactly right. You can see the same things happening in the schools. These kids are mostly going to schools where all the kids in their backpack, going to these affluent schools, in their backpack they bring their parents' aspirations and their parents' resources and their parents' trips to Paris. And these kids over here, when they go to school, in their backpacks they're bringing, gang violence and drug abuse at home. And you see the same thing in terms of the opportunity that kids have to connect with other caring adults. For example, there's a gap like this in terms of extracurricular activities.
Because of the pay to play.
Because of pay to play, exactly right. So, as I say, you go through all these different facets of people's lives, the close focus on the family, and then you come wider and you see the same thing is true. These kids, the affluent kids, are going to church still. These kids aren't because their parents aren't. And that means they don't have caring adults outside their immediate family. It's a miracle that there are still some kids from over here who are able to make it up, but fewer and fewer of them will be, not because they're not smart, not because they've done anything wrong except choose the wrong parents, and that's not fair.
So, in the words of your book, what is to be done? What are some of the important solutions that you think we should focus more on in the future?
A different sphere might be we need to make some reforms in K-12 education. The problem wasn't caused by schools. The problem was caused outside of schools, but K-12 improvements can be helpful. But it also means things like mentoring. I mean, these kids on the right side of town have lots of other adults outside the family, pastors and coaches and neighbors and so on, and these kids don't. These kids are increasingly alone. And so you need to think about mentoring. You need to think about getting churches and other community institutions involved in not just drop by, not just, once a year having lunch with a poor kid and saying, how's your life going, kid? We wouldn't do that to our own kids. The way we raise our own kids is to be there when they need them, when they need us.
Offer a helping hand.
Exactly. And that's what we need to do for these kids over here, too.
So in Chapter 1, you state Americans believe that income inequality has increased in recent years, and they're right. But they aren't so sure about the equality of opportunity. But this is crucial for the book, is that conventional indicators of social mobility are 3 or 4 decades behind.
Yeah.
So explain what kind of challenges this perspective that the older generation has on any changes.
That's where the title of the book comes from. The title of the book comes from the fact that when I was growing up and my parents used the term "our kids," they didn't mean my sister and me. They meant all the kids in town. That the term "our kids" meant all the kids in town. But over the course of the last 50 years, the meaning of the term "our kids" has shriveled. And so if you talk to people in Port Clinton now about the poor kids in town, they say, well, it's a sad story, but they're not my kids, they're somebody else's kids. Let them worry about them. That's partly what's changed. We no longer have this sense that we're all in this together, and that therefore I have an obligation and an interest, an economic interest as well as a moral obligation to worry about other people's kids. And, some people are going to say, sure, not my problem, let somebody else worry about it. But I think a lot of people are going to say, now that I see that story, yeah, I got to worry about it. And I will say one last thing about the stories. I speak to people all over the country. I've spoken to hundreds of audiences about this. And in my standard talk, I talk about a particular young woman from my hometown named Mary Sue. And she's led, through no fault of her own, a terrible life from beginning when she was very little. And after I talk, this happened just yesterday in the Quad Cities in Iowa. After my talk, a woman came up to me and said, I'm Mary Sue. And she began crying. And I'm not trying hard not to tear up. She said, you've told my story, but no one else knows that story. And so the power of these stories, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little soppy here at the end, but the power of these stories is people recognize themselves and others in these stories.
And they respond, and they're more likely to follow the movement towards change. Robert, thank you so much for joining us on the Compass Literature Corner.
Thank you very much.
That's it for the Compass Literature Corner. Please tune in next week for more people, places, and issues facing our viewing area. I'm Pioneer's Laura K. Prosser, and may your compass always point you in a direction of a good book.
Major support for Compass is provided by the ongoing support of the Leo P. Flynn Estate of Millbank, South Dakota. Additional support is provided by the Southwest Minnesota Private Industry Council, promoting Southwest Minnesota as a place rich with opportunity. Come for the jobs, stay for the lifestyle. More information at swmnpic.org.